All right, so as the attendees come in, just know that you guys are muted. We'll get started right around 10 a.m. We'll just give some time for some others to join. But thank you for joining us this morning, and we will get started soon. All right, so it's 10 a.m., so we will start to begin this webinar. I see a few more people joining. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your morning to join us for this webinar on New York City's Department of Buildings and what to do when they come to your job site and how to handle it. Today's webinar will last about 1 hour. It is being recorded. As you all know, you are muted and you will remain muted on the call to reduce background noise. So if you have any questions, there's a Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. You can click that Q&A button and type in a question to be submitted, or you feel free to email me, text me. I should introduce myself. My name is Tanner from the Associated Builders and Contractors. So if you have any questions, reach out to me in any way you can, and I'll make sure that we get those questions answered at the end of the call. And then just some knowledge for everybody, when the webinar is over, we will share the recording of this presentation, the slides, as well as I know the Cahill team has some helpful tips and tools to share with you guys all at the end of the presentation as well. So when this wraps up, we will turn that over to you. And without further ado, I'll pass this over to our speakers, Kristin and Bobby from Cahill.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well this morning. I am Kristin Senese. I'm a vice president here at Cahill Strategies. We are consultants as well as members of the ABC team for the Empire State chapter. Bobby D'Alessio is also on the call. He is one of our former DOB consultants that works for Cahill. So he was at the Department of Buildings for 32 years. And we are happy to be doing this webinar with everybody here. I know Tanner had mentioned it, but any question and answers that you guys have for us, let us know. We are going to take all of them at the end of the presentation, and we're going to get started. So right now we are seeing an uptick on DOB coming out to the job sites, and we understand that everybody is incredibly concerned about what to do when an inspector comes to the site, how to handle it, and what tools and tricks you can do to make sure that your visits are not as punitive and more cordial with the Department of Buildings. So we are seeing an uptick in violations, and I know that there's a number of things that Bobby wanted to cover on this aspect.
Yeah, you know, it's always been a problem. The department goes through inspectors very quickly, and there are a lot of inspectors out there that don't have a lot of experience. So I'm sure that's been your experience, and there are some that do have some experience, but there's fewer and fewer that have a history with the department, and more that are new. And a lot of the new ones that come on, they're throwing them into the field really, in a sense, without the proper training. And the supervisors are few and far between. They're overwhelmed by their responsibilities, and they don't have an opportunity always to investigate or look into the actions being taken by their inspectors. So when you're that busy, what you tend to do is just whatever the inspector says, you just go along with it, you sign the paper and you process it, and then you're on a treadmill. So that all by way of saying that we understand what the problems that are out there. One of the things you can do in terms of when you have an inspector come to the site is, you know, never, I mean, it's hard sometimes to hold your temper but never get into a confrontation with them. If you do have issues to address, address them in a civil manner, and then try to reach out to, us, or if you have contact with DOB, try to reach out to a supervisor to discuss the issues that were raised by the inspector on site. It's better doing it that way than it is to sort of go head to head with the inspector in the field. In terms of the stop work orders, there's a myriad of reasons that a stop work order could be issued, but a lot of it today is really geared toward the absence of the proper safety procedures or the proper safety equipment. Those seem to be some of the big things that come up. When you're walking with an inspector, I think the important thing is to have all your plans ready and available for him. A lot of times jobs are stopped simply because the contractor can't get to the proper plan in order to show the inspector. So you want to keep that site safety plan on site and available, and you want to have someone that understands the site safety plan, that could talk to him and understands the protective equipment that's been installed. What you find today, in the old days, the inspectors that came out, like from the best squad, the old time inspectors, they didn't pay too much attention to that site safety plan. They had experience, they walked the site, and they wanted to look at it with their own eyes and pick up what the hazards were or what the issues were. Today, when you have newer inspectors, they tend to rely more on the plan and ask for the plan. And what I found is the plan is often contrary to what the field conditions are. And this is something that the contractor himself could have picked up very easily and didn't, and he gets caught short by that. So it's important that the contractor review the site safety plan and make sure that it makes sense and it's in conformance with what the actual field conditions are. So anyway, I'll stop there, but those are the main things. And in addressing the stop work order from a cure point of view, understand that there's violations and there's stop work orders, and the violations are cured in a different way, and Chris will talk about that. The stop work order is something that's cured regardless of the violations and whether you filed a certificate of correction. You could still get the stop work order rescinded while you're pending a hearing or while you're pending submitting the certificate of correction. But the conditions in the violation are something that you have to address when you're requesting a rescind of a particular stop work order. Understand too that there is a compliance unit now and there is an enforcement unit. So when I was there, and again I retired about 3 years ago, I was there for 31 years. All of that was in one unit. So now you have a situation where they bifurcated the responsibilities, and you have two separate units, and a lot of times they tell you different things. But just so you understand, the compliance unit is basically doing the proactive inspections on some cycle, whether it's monthly, whether it's bi-monthly. They'll come out, look at the job, see if there's any issues regarding safety, issue violations, issue stop work orders, and then disappear. So that the group unit you have to follow up with is the enforcement unit. And that's good in a way, because the enforcement unit tends to have more experience and it's a little more understanding of the real world of construction. So by all means, go to the enforcement unit for the rescind. Don't go back to the compliance unit, because I think you're just creating a more difficult situation for yourself. The system is set up that one issues it and the other rescinds it. The only difference, initial action taken by the enforcement unit is through complaints. So they'll respond to complaints or incidents, and they'll be the first guy on the block, so to speak. They'll issue their violations or stop work orders or take no action, whatever the case may be. And then they will also do the rescind for those stop work orders.
I just want to make a quick note. Not all stop work orders are issued by the Department of Buildings. We also have the building marshal that can issue stop work orders, as well as City Hall enforcement that can also issue stop work orders. And we can definitely get into those specifics at the end if anybody has any specific questions about them. In terms of the Department of Buildings, though, re-inspection times are about 3 to 5 business days. Yes, they are doing inspections on Saturdays and Sundays during this time. So the next major point that we wanted to discuss, because it comes up a great deal with all of our contractors and our owners, we're seeing a lot of confusion when it comes to violations themselves and how to correct violations, which are the underlying issues that cause your stop work orders. So if a DOB inspector comes out to the site, you have 3 options for violations. Class 1 are immediate hazardous, Class 2 are less severe, and Class 3 are usually ones that have a cure associated with them so that there's no penalty given if you cure the violation before the date on that cure notice. So Class 1s have to be done immediately. Your certificates of correction have to be filed immediately. If they're not filed within 30 days, you do stand the ramifications of obtaining a civil penalty, which is a secondary fine that's added to any violation before it goes before ECB. Class 2s, you have to file your COCs as well. You have a little bit longer period of time on those. They're about 45 days, but again, those still have to be filed. Major distinction between civil penalties and ECB fines. ECB, you have a hearing date. Right now, we're looking at hearing dates that are happening in the fall for any violations that are currently being issued. Civil penalties are immediate and they are issued by the Department of Buildings. ECB, you pay your fine to the ECB office, the oath office. Civil penalties are made straight to the Department of Buildings. In December, DOB increased civil penalties for Class 1 violations. So where they used to be $1,500 for not filing your certificates of correction, they now range between $1,500 to $6,000 per violation. So again, it's incredibly important to make sure that your COCs are filed immediately upon correcting the condition with any violation that's issued, whether it be a stop work order or not. Again, certificates of correction, there are 3 parts to them. You have the AEU-2, which just outlines who corrected the work, the AEU-20, which is a statement about what work was done to correct the violating conditions, as well as any supporting documentation. Usually it's drawings if there's an issue with the plans, logs if they are asking to see an amended log, JHAs if there was an incident or an accident, and photographs from the site itself. Licensing. Where everybody typically used to see the licensing unit as only being an issue when you're renewing your license or getting a license, we are now seeing that the licensing unit is becoming part of the everyday on job sites. If there are so many different options when it comes to licensing and licenses that any official can hold on a site, we have site safety managers and coordinators, and then we have the superintendents and so on and so forth. Licensing is becoming one of the largest violations that we're seeing as an uptick on current sites. They are checking expiration dates, they're checking insurances, and ensuring that everybody that holds a license is in full compliance for all of the requirements for each of the licenses. As many people are aware, licensing underwent several changes last spring into summer. Now everything is done through the e-filing system. Again, massive issues with the DOB Now system. The e-filing system in and of itself had some hiccups along the way. They're still having some issues right now. But when it comes to submitting your documentation for initial licenses, as well as renewals, those are all done through the DOB Now system. Everybody will send out a link to it just so you guys can see the how-to on that to make sure that your accounts are up to date. You cannot renew your license if you do not have an active e-filing account. That goes for owners, GCs, site safety managers, coordinators, and anybody that holds a license. And for changes to a license, again, because they're checking them on the sites, addresses, insurances, and all of the documentation needed to ensure that your license is still valid, those all have to be submitted in person to the Department of Buildings. They are dropped off. The person who handles them is only in every other week for 1 day a week. So again, the Department of Buildings is accepting all of the official documentation in person for changing to your license, but everything else is now done through the e-filing system. Please keep in mind insurance updating, it's done electronically. It's taking 3 to 5 days. We are hearing that certain companies and general contractors are having an issue with it. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our email address is going to be on the last slide, and our contact information will be in all the material that we're sending out after this. You should not be waiting more than a week for insurances to be up to date. They are doing those rather quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also, Chris, if I could just jump in really quick. I just wanted to mention that most, if not all of the information that you need to know about licensing, renewals, insurance, expiration dates, permits, permit expiration date, it's available in Biz, a wealth of information, and it's also available in DOB now. So the contractor has to learn to negotiate that, and there should be someone checking at least on a weekly basis whether there's expirations that are coming within a week, within 2 weeks, or whatever, so you could plan ahead. What I've noticed when I look at jobs, I usually do a review of the permits. I check who the site safety people are. I check their license. I look at all this stuff, and many times you pick up on the fact that, like, a site safety manager, his license expiring in a week, right? I mean, all of that information you could pre-plan, you can look at, and you can question, and you could put pressure on the sub, or pressure on a site safety manager to make sure that this renewal takes place. But don't be surprised by this stuff, and don't think DOB's not going to catch it. They're catching stuff that they never caught before. One example is we had a major building with a concrete subcontractor happened to be on the permit because there was a concrete safety manager required. If you go into Biz, and you pull up the concrete subcontractor, you'll see, or I saw, and easily you could see, that his permit was about to expire in like 3 days. 3 days. I mean, his insurance was about to expire in 3 days. And you have to look at all three insurances. They have different expiration dates. But again, three days is not enough to get this updated in the system with the current backlog. Something like that, without any push from a consultant, could easily take you 3 weeks to get done, 4 weeks, 5 weeks to get done. And DOB picked up on it, and DOB stopped all concrete work on the job because of one insurance policy that was expired. Now, the fact is the contractor actually had a current insurance policy, but because it wasn't updated in Biz, the job was stopped. So that's the kind of thing you have to expect out there. And a little bit of review on a weekly basis could go a long way. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, that's mine?
Site safety plans.
Okay. I just wanted to remind everyone, this industry notice was put out. Actually, when I was there, I put this notice out. And what the reason this came out at the time is that there was such a backlog in site safety plan review and approval that we decided that we needed to do something about it. And what we came to the conclusion is that there were a lot of minor revisions that were being submitted that were clogging up the system. So we wrote this industry notice basically saying that minor revisions could be made without being submitted to the building department. And it provides a mechanism for doing that. But basically, when it all boils down, if you have a minor revision, you could make a correction in the field. It has to be initialed by the site safety manager, and it has to be on a site safety job, and it has to be logged in the site safety manager's log. And then the industry notice, which Chris is going to send out, gives you a whole list of things that you could possibly put under the category of minor revisions. And at the time, when this was written and published, we try to be as generous as possible. And if you read through it, you'll see you could fit a lot of what you need to do on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis in terms of changes within one of these, whatever there are, 20 bullet points about minor revisions. Take advantage of this, because if you don't, that means you have a 6-week turnaround time when you have to make a change to your fence, and it's just unsustainable. So use it well. Use it to your advantage, and make sure you follow all the guidelines in terms of initialing by the site safety manager, have it on site, bubble it, and so forth. And if an inspector comes on and questions you about some field change that was made, you should point them to the memo, have the memo on site, and show that you've complied with the memo. And I think it'll save you a lot of aggravation.
This is also one of the most common violations that we're seeing right now. In the last month or so, we've seen about 6 violations issued across the 5 boroughs. A number of them are in Brooklyn. The inspectors are most certainly checking for site safety plans and making sure that the field conditions match your plans.
Yeah, I also should mention, if you're not you know, you've got to put pressure sometimes on your site safety manager to actually open the plan and look at it, and to walk with the site safety plan and pick up the discrepancies. You shouldn't be surprised when DOB comes on the site and picks up a discrepancy. That should not be the first time you know about the discrepancy. Know about them in ahead of time, and try to make the corrections that are necessary if they fall within the purviews of minor revisions. Again, because if you don't do that, it's a 6-week turnaround time, and very easily they're issuing stop work orders like candy out there. They'll shut you down for something contrary, a serious issue that's contrary to the plan in terms of protection. Go ahead, Chris.
Temporary use permits are another item of the code that's always been there that hadn't been enforced up until recently. The temporary use permits are typically used for model apartments or sales offices on a site, but they can be used for more, and DOB is most certainly enforcing all of them. Bobby's going to go into more about that.
Yeah, there was a bulletin put out. It's Bulletin 2010, 2010 it was put out, and it's the second bulletin of the year. And it deals specifically with model apartments and sales offices that are often in buildings in preparation for showing the apartments or what have you. And again, this memo is specifically dealing with model apartments / sales offices. So I just want to real quickly, I'm going to go through the basic requirements. It's always easier when you have a ground floor sales office because the requirements are less stringent. When you're in above, you're in the 10th story or whatever. It means that basically you have to have everything in sort of almost like TCO order, all the way from a floor above where that sales office is, all the way down to the ground. So the easiest things to get approved for are the ground floor sales offices model apartments. Again, both on the ground floor and on an upper floor, they both require the filing of what we call an Alt 2, so it's a minor application, but it has to be filed in what's called non-directive fashion, non-directive 14. And the reason for this is that it requires a DOB inspector to come out and look at it. And once he looks at it and okays it, and everything is in accordance with that plan you filed, then what happens is he sends a memo to the borough commissioner's office, and the borough commissioner's office will issue what they call a temporary use permit, giving you the right to have someone in the building to look at these apartments from the public, even though you don't have a TCO at the time. So I just wanted to go through real quickly, just a couple of bullet points that are of significance, and it gives you some idea that it's not a cakewalk. You have to do something on site. So in addition to filing the application, some of the requirements: one, it's limited to one sales office or model apartment on the ground floor. The ground floor has exit discharge to the street, and that's why the requirements are less stringent. So that exit discharge to the street has to be completed. Overhead protection has to be there when you get to the sidewalk, obviously. So people have to be able to get to safety, both enter and exit in safety. The applicant himself must demonstrate that he's in compliance with the bulletin 2010-002, and he should include that with a note on the plan. And that includes conformance with egress and accessibility requirements for the people that are going to enter the building to look at the apartment. He has to demonstrate compliance with sprinkler requirements, so that if you're on the ground floor, the office space or the apartment space has to be sprinkled in accordance with the code, as it would be for a permanent building. What they'll do is they'll allow you to take the sprinkler off of domestic water if there are under 30 heads, right? If not, you have to have the sprinkler functioning the way it would in the permanent configuration of the building for that particular space that you're using. You have to make sure, and this is very important, that the public cannot get in unauthorized areas where construction is taking place. That's one of the most important things. You have to set up barriers. You have to keep these people out of construction areas. And lastly, electrical applications need to be filed for any electrical work that's related to the model apartment. unless that work is already filed for under the new building or the alteration in the permanent condition. Same thing for plumbing. You have to have an application if there's some unique type of plumbing that's done in this model apartment that is not reflected on the permanent condition plans, then you would have to file the plumbing under this all two application that you're filing. So that's the basic requirements. When you get to floors above the ground floor, what the real hard thing to comply with is, again, egress and sprinklerization all the way down from the top, wherever the apartment is, one floor above, all the way down to the street. The sprinkler needs to be signed off in this case. The elevator needs to be running in this case because it's not a direct entrance off of the ground floor, right? Permanent standpipe needs to be operational and signed off. Sprinkler coverage must be as indicated on the approved plans all the way down from wherever the unit is. The fire alarm must be signed off. So as you can see, once you get above the ground floor, you almost have to be in TCO ready condition in order to get this approval for the sales offices or the model apartment. One thing also to remember, that application also has to include an occupancy protection plan. Basically showing how you're segregating the occupants, and in this case, the occupants are just the people coming in for the model apartment to view it, how you're segregating them from the construction activities that are going on, that continue to go on the site. It's an important, but it's an overlooked item. I don't say tenant protection plan because tenant protection plan is a residential use. And even if you're showing an apartment to prospective buyers, it's really a commercial use and not a residential use. So therefore I say you need an occupancy protection plan and not a tenant protection plan when you want to use, when you want to have a model apartment. And that's about it on this one.
So keep in mind, temporary use permits are issued in 90-day stints, and they are becoming more necessary, especially with the new legislation enforcing construction workers have a certain level of training. So they are definitely becoming more necessary on job sites to avoid the issues that you would face with the compliance to Local Law 196. So where we come from on a day-to-day basis, we get questions that are all over the place from our GCs and our developers and ABC members. And these are some of the questions that we get every single day. And I'm sure during the question answers, you guys are going to have a ton for yourselves, but just so that you understand some of what the larger questions are right now and what everybody's currently facing, we're just going to go through a few of these quick questions before we get to what your questions are for this morning's webinar. So how long does it take to get a sidewalk shed removal inspection? Right now, they're turning them around in 24 to 48 hours. So if we put it in on a Friday, you're typically going to have them on either Monday or Tuesday. They aren't currently scheduling these for the weekends, but again, it's pretty quick turnaround time in terms of the sidewalk shed removals for any of your major buildings. Licensing applications for review. This is one of the largest questions that we have every single day from every facet of the industry. So right now, site safety professionals, their applications can take between 6 and 9 months. For the initial applications, reviews are taking 2 to 3 months. And if there's any issues or DOB asks for more information, those do have to go back in for resubmission and review. And the resubmission and review aren't being expedited because of the backlog that the department has at this moment in time. When it comes to GC licenses or GC registrations, those are, again, taking about 6 months, if not a little bit longer, depending on the complexity of the licensing themselves. And everything dealing with the e-filing system, which you have to do after your license is approved, those are taking 2 to 3 weeks as well on every turnaround time. We covered this already, applications for licensing online or in person. Again, initial applications and renewals are done online with all of the items uploaded. Any changes to the license are done in person at the Department of Buildings. They do have a spot for drop-offs. And if you guys have any of those questions specifically, we can address those. If you want to just shoot us an email, shoot Tanner or Donna an email as well. how to change the address on your license. This seems to be coming more from our general contractors, especially if they're changing office locations. We are seeing that Department of Buildings as well as the Department of Transportation are taking address changes more seriously than they have in the past. They want to ensure that all addresses match the actual registration, the corporate filings, the articles of incorporation with the state, as well as all insurance policies, including floors and suite numbers. So if you're changing your address, you do have to do the LIC2, ensure that the address is listed on your LIC2 the exact way it appears on your leases, as well as on your insurance policies for both DOT as well as DOB. And one of the new changes that came out in the last few weeks is the ICO process. So a lot of individuals, as they're going for CO, have always used the temporary certificate of occupancy, which is the TCO path. In January, the ICO path was allowed to move forward. The city council voted on a piece of legislation. ICO is an interim certificate of occupancy. ICO do not need to be renewed as like the TCOs do. Once you get it, you have it until you get your final CO on a project. And the ICO, to obtain it, you need to have all life safety involved, installed and approved, as well as several other major factions of it. So if you have your plumbing signed off, your electrical has to be signed off. There are a few items that are still up in the air if it comes to BPP sign off and street tree sign off. Those typically can be moved to final CO items. And the ARC system, for anybody that's dealing with that, is always a final CO item. So again, fire alarm, sprinkler, standpipe, plumbing, electrical, and your construction walkthrough are basics for the ICO process, and TCO process is still there, but those have to be renewed. So I believe Tanner is going to start reading off if anybody has any questions. Again, you can do questions in the Q&A section as well as in the chat.
Yep. Thank you so much, Kristin. And we do have some questions loaded up. But as she said, if you have any questions for Bobby or Kristin, please put them in the Q&A, chat them to me, email them to me, text them if you have my number. We're happy to make sure we get them all answered. One of the questions that I'll just answer off the bat as we received was, is this PowerPoint going to be shared? And I can tell you, yes, this PowerPoint will be shared as well as the recording. Following this webinar, all of you participants will receive both the slides, the recording, and I think Kristin and Bobby have a lot of extra information that they want to make sure to send you that will be helpful.
Yeah, we're going to send over the buildings bulletin as well as some of the other checklists for licensing, as well as anything that comes up when it comes to the temporary use permits and all of the items that we discussed.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristin. So jumping into our first question. So the enforcement inspectors are sending photographs to a supervisor at 2 Lafayette. This supervisor is ordering class 1 violations, stop work orders on partials written without even being on the site. How is this fair or even accurate?
So the violations are always sent to supervisors, especially if there's any question if it should be a stop work order or partial, if it's just going to be a straight violation. In some senses, I know not in all senses, but in some senses, when a supervisor gets involved, it limits the unwarranted violations that could be issued. From experience, last month we had a new inspector go out to a site in Brooklyn. They ended up issuing 10 full stop work orders for items that should have just been class 2 violations for netting, or if you're dealing with certain other items when it came to the fence and different items along those natures. We actually had to have a supervisor go back out 2 days later. They rescinded and dismissed several of the violations because they weren't written properly or in the proper sections of code cited on them. And that could have all been avoided if they did reach out to the supervisor ahead of time. So not in all cases, but in some cases, it's better when they reach out to the supervisor. If they're sending the pictures to the supervisor, they're definitely going to have to review it ahead of time. But I think Bobby had some points on this as well.
Yeah. Look, what's happening is that when they're also running a pilot program, by the way, where they're talking about doing remote inspections, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about an inspector who perhaps is unsure about what he's looking at and needs to get some counsel from the supervisor. So he's calling the supervisor, he's sending him the photographs, and then the supervisor is making the decision. That's not necessarily a bad thing if the information is being transferred appropriately, and he's telling him what's out there, and he's describing it well, and he's showing him pictures of what's out there. Sure, it's better that the inspector on site be trained, but we're a long way from there at this point, and you have to deal with the situation at hand. In terms of fairness, I don't know what to say about that. Is it fair? Is it not fair? I would say it's better they're reaching out than not reaching out in a way, because at least the supervisor, who's supposed to have more experience, could perhaps better navigate what's happening on site, and perhaps direct the inspector in a better manner. If it results in a stop work order, or it results in violations, the question is it legitimate or not legitimate? I think that's the question about fairness. Are they giving, is the supervisor authorizing violations based on the conditions, or he just doesn't, he's too busy to deal with it, and he just says, okay, whatever the inspector says, I'll go with that. So I don't know what the real issue is with this question. Whether they feel that after the supervisor reviews it, he's telling the inspector to issue a violation that's inappropriate. It depends on what the condition on site is.
And if you guys want to reach out to us, again, our email address is on your screen. Feel free to shoot us more specifics on the matter, and we can go in further about that specific item.
Thank you both. So next question for you. So inspectors are walking the site and noting that conditions are compliant, only return sometimes hours later to the site with multiple Class 1 violations or partial stop work orders from items that could have been corrected immediately, such as loose netting, maybe missing a toe board, minor plan revision, minor housekeeping, uncovered container, etc. So what would you recommend to do to combat this?
Don't look at me, Chris. Don't look at me.
This is one of the situations where it would have been better for them to call their supervisor and shoot over a picture about what the conditions actually are. So when it comes to
I'm sorry, Chrissy. Go ahead.
No. So when it comes to netting and toe boards and items that can be rectified, the recommendation is, if an inspector points it out that it's a violating condition and they're noting it, fix it immediately, take photographic proof. If they come back and issue a violation, you can immediately send that into the department, say the violation was corrected, here's the photographic proof, here's the date and timestamp on the photos. Make sure all photos have date and timestamps on them, as well as all logs. Send it to the department. They'll usually do an administrative lift. But when they're noting violations of that situation and that magnitude, I would just say correct them immediately, take the proof, make sure that you have it documented and readily available should they come back.
Yeah, again, this is an unfortunate situation that happens, but it comes about sometimes when the inspector is inexperienced. And what happens is he'll usually, and I know, I mean, these guys used to work for me. So when they're inexperienced, they'll look at everything, and then they have to go look at their books. So they'll go away sometimes, they'll sit in their car for a while, and then they'll come up with everything they'll go through everything that they looked at and noted, and then see that some of it should have required a violation. Some of it may have required a stop work order. And I think that's what's happening. And at the same time, when they're in the car, they're calling their supervisors, they're conferring with him. And then where you thought, everything was fine and the inspector left, he really didn't leave. He left with information that he gathered on site, and now he's consulting with his books, his manuals, and he's consulting with his supervisor, and then coming up with issues and coming back, issuing stop work orders and issuing violations. I'm not sure if sometimes and unfortunately the violations, the inspector doesn't come and talk to the contractor again. He just posts them on the fence. I hope that's not happening, and that at least the inspector has the courtesy to come and speak with the contractor again and explain to him why the violations are being written. Again, I don't know the specific details of the question.
Tanner?
Sorry about that. I had a problem with my mute button. Thank you both. Next question is, If a supervisor in the enforcement unit had multiple complaints written against him as an inspector from multiple GCs, developers, etc., how did the city come to promote him to a supervisor position?
I think we all know exactly which inspector we're talking about here.
Want me to handle that one?
Please do.
Well, first of all, bad inspectors you can't get rid of no matter what you do. And I know that because I was on the inside. And what happens a lot of times is the department doesn't back up the supervisor. Even if a supervisor wants to make a case against an inspector, the department usually doesn't back up the supervisor. Supervisor has to submit all kinds of documentation. It has to be reviewed by IAD. They review it, and at most, unless it's some glaring sort of corruption involved, he gets a slap on the wrist, and he remains in the service of the department. And then he moves around the department to different units, and different units may not know his history, or they could know his history but don't care. And they'll become there'll be an opening, right? And everyone has a right to submit their application for the opening, and you can't just you can't use the basis that, oh well, the public complained about him to deny him the job. So what happens basically is he winds up getting promoted. Look, I've been around a long time. It's very difficult to deal with these issues. I've even gone to bat against inspectors that I thought were inappropriate. And it was just a frustrating experience. And in the end of the day, the inspector remained, and the supervisor had to basically grit their teeth. So by all means, though, if you have a glaring instance of problematic behavior on site, I really do think it should be brought to the attention of higher ups. I know that contractors are afraid because they're afraid that of retribution by the inspector, and it itself is a real concern. But it's the important thing is try not to get into confrontations with the inspector on site or the supervisor for that matter, and try to deal with the person, even if he is a bit of a jerk. try to treat him with respect. I think you can accomplish a lot more by trying to work with the supervisor or inspector than going at it with them, tooth and nail. For what it's worth.
Thank you very much. I think that question leads really nicely into this next one, which is, what can a GC do if they believe they are being targeted? And then also, are IAD complaints anonymous?
So when it comes to what can you do, you can file with DOI, which is the Department of Investigation, if you have any complaints specifically on any official from the city agencies. That's not limited to DOB, it's all city agencies. In terms of, are they anonymous? I don't believe they are. Bobby, do you know if they're anonymous?
The complaints that come in, yeah, all the complaints are anonymous to the public. And anyone can make any complaint anonymously through the 311 call center. I'm not sure if you're referring to being targeted by DOB specifically, or being targeted by complainants in the neighborhood where the construction is.
I think they're talking about being targeted by a DOB official, so
Right.
an inspector that comes to the site.
Yeah, that's another issue. Look, people have complained, even when I was there, complained to me about this, and it's a very hard thing to really ferret out, that they're being targeted, because technically, first of all, they cannot go to any site without it being routed by a supervisor. So that they could just drop in on you willy-nilly, that would be a real serious violation if they were caught doing that. So that most likely their appearance on the site is being driven by a protocol for periodically inspecting job sites, or it's being driven by a series of complaints that are coming in. And don't forget, these complaints could come in through the normal 311 channel, or they could come in because someone gets in touch with the commissioner or the deputy commissioner, and then a complaint is, and then he gets in touch with the supervisor, tells them to route someone out there to look at this, and so forth and so on. So there could be various sources to the complaint. I'm not always sure. Many contractors have told me they felt they're being targeted, or even owners felt they're being targeted. But when I look into it, it's a feeling or an impression they have. but it's really not substantiated by anything. And a lot of times the inspector is actually out there because he was told to go out there because complaints are coming in from various sources. So I wouldn't fall back on that as an excuse of why you're getting visits. I think the important thing is to control what's in your control. And that is to make sure that there's nothing on your site that could lead to a violation or a stop work order. That's the only part of this thing you can control.
So yeah, so if you have anything specific on it, I know that we've had a couple of contractors in the past that have come to either us at Cahill or if they've gone to Brian at ABC. We can have conversations with the department on the back end just to see if there is any issues that need to be known to either the GC or the owner of the project. But again, that's case by case basis. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us about that one. We can definitely jump in if necessary. If it comes to site visits, the Department of Buildings, they keep an ongoing track record every single month of which contractors have what violations and what sites they have underneath each specific license. So if you're going to see an uptick in it, it's probably usually derived from another project. So if you had one incident or accident on a job site, they are going to visit all of your sites. That's not necessarily being targeted. It's just the department doing their due diligence to make sure that what happened on one site doesn't happen again. And again, it couldn't even be, it's not always necessarily related to what you're doing. So if we had a few months ago, we had a number of crane incidents. The department looked at all the crane projects across the entire city. If we had the tower cranes or if we had the mobile cranes, or last year we had the issues with the spider cranes and needing the updated license for it. So they definitely did visit anybody that had any crane registered to make sure that they were all in full compliance. Earlier this year, we saw where the department went out to any building that was local law 11 requirements, just to make sure that the facades were all maintained after a few incidences last year where facades fell onto the public. So again, it's not necessarily what you're doing, it's just what's happening in the industry causes the department to go and look at everything.
Yeah, and it's this started back when I was with the department, and I used to just so you know how it's done. It's we're able to pull reports really within 10, 15, 20 minutes. We have analysts that do this, so we can create what we used to call a sweep report, which probably still called a sweep report, and it could be based on anything. It could be we had a problem on a particular site, a construction super job, and they could handle more than one job. So they can handle up to 10 jobs according to the code. So we would sweep this guy's license and find out what job he's on. So if we had a problem on one job site, and usually if it had resulted in some sort of fatality or collapse or a serious injury, well, immediately we can pull up all the jobs that this person is registered on, and then we can send that into the field, and they'll sweep those locations. This could be done with anything. If a general contractor, we can pull. Within 10 minutes, I can know every job that particular contractor is on, and I can set up a sweep protocol. And the sweep protocol would include sort of specific things that person had to inspect, and those specific things may be related to what happened on that one job site. And then there are also other types of local laws that came out, like work without a permit. So they will sweep locations where they've had a particular contractor had gotten a violation for work without a permit or work contrary to plan, and then they will try to sweep this person's license to see if there's any problems on any other jobs that he has. So this has happened quite frequently, and it's happened because it's become easy now with data processing and Excel to pull these reports very easily and send people out. And you're going to see more and more of this happens. Whenever something serious happens on a job site, the next call that I would get when I was there from my superiors was, let's sweep this guy. So you've got to expect that could happen. And that doesn't mean you're being targeted. It means that you're being swept for cause. And so I wouldn't consider it targeting when it happens within those parameters.
Thank you so much. And our last question is about pilot programs. So are there any DOB pilot programs that we should keep our eyes out for coming out soon?
So Bobby mentioned it a little bit earlier. Right now, the Department of Buildings is doing a pilot program in Brooklyn. So if you have a work without a permit violation that's issued, they are doing virtual re-inspections for Brooklyn only for the specific scope of work violation. So if you have any more questions about that, we can definitely include that in all of the material that we send out later. But yes, the pilot program is a work without a permit one for Brooklyn only.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I think the general gist of it is that they're trying to leverage their resources because they know they don't always have enough people to do re-inspections. So they're hoping that this could be a new way of doing a re-inspection without having to schedule someone to come out or whatever. So the supervisors can do this virtual type of re-inspection. You know, I don't know how well it's going to work out. We'll see how the pilot works out and whether it's going to be rolled out to more boroughs. But I mean, I could see there being problems with this. But if it's a minor thing or a simple thing, perhaps it could work and it would be a way of DOB leveraging the resources.
Thank you very much. And seeing no more questions, I will just make another call for, if you have any questions for either of our speakers, we do have time left if you'd like to submit them into the Q&A box below, or you can chat them. We'll make sure we get them answered. However, I do want to draw attention to, and I'll let Kristin take it from here, but we are having another webinar, part 2 of the DOB.
So we've had many questions come across, especially when talking with Brian and everybody on the ABC team. A lot of the contractors for our members downstate have questions about the Department of Buildings and other city and state agencies and how to deal with them as it applies to the 5 boroughs. So this is obviously part 1. We are going to have part 2 on April 22nd at 10 a.m. And if you guys have any specific questions or topics you want addressed during that one, we covered violations and everything else today. But again, we can touch upon more if you guys just want to shoot us over some topics or questions that you have.
Thank you so much. And seeing no more questions come in, I appreciate everybody's time, taking the time to join us this morning for the webinar. Just to repeat, we will be sending the slides as well as the recording following this presentation. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Donna. You can see there's the email on the slide in front of you to reach out to the Cahill team. And thank you so much. And we're here to help. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a good day.